Hi guys, Josh here, aka Beards and Books. Today I'm doing a bit of a bookshelf tour, but this is going to be focusing on one of my favourite authors, Stephen King. So guys, if you've been around since my channel sort of first come about, you'll have heard me talk about the fact that Stephen King was an author I wanted to read more of. I've always been intrigued by his stories, but I haven't read as many as I should. I recently did a Stephen King reading month where I tried to read through a bunch of his books. I read, I think it was 4 books, just over 2,000 pages. Sorry, 200,000, that'd be pretty impressive. And I really enjoyed it. So not long after that, I went out and basically bought a load of Stephen King books in a real mix of paperback and hardback. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about the books that I've read and then also the books that I haven't, and look to get feedback from you guys about which ones I should sort of prioritise and read next. Hope you enjoy. So first up is the Bill Hodges trilogy, also known as the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, depending on how you want to word it. These are ones that I really enjoyed. So I actually read End of Watch, which is the 3rd and final book in the series, excluding The Outsider. I actually read this one first, so I kind of knew how the story ended before going back to read the others. That wasn't intentional. I picked it up at my local supermarket. Didn't realise until I was about 100 pages in this was part of a series, and then obviously, as you can see, I went back and read the others. The first 2 books of Mr. Mercedes and Finders Keepers are actually ones I read during my Stephen King reading month, so I will leave a link above if you want to know more about those. But this is a series that I highly recommend, especially to people that are relatively new to Stephen King or are looking to get into Stephen King's writing. His writing is absolutely brilliant in these, but it's not as dark and not as intense as some of his more serious horror stories, but you still get a really good idea of his writing and of his style. It's dark and intense, I'm not going to lie, they're not kids' books, but it's not exactly it. They're brilliant. I can't recommend them highly enough. Definitely one you should pick up. Continue the theme of books that I read recently. Next one is The Bizarre Bad Dreams, which is a collection of short stories. Again, this is one that I read at least in part during my Stephen King reading month. I have to be honest, I'm not a big fan of short story collections. It's just something I've never really gotten into. I read a bunch of these. I will carry on and read more at a later date, but short stories aren't something that I push myself to read that often, just because I don't personally get as engrossed in the story as I do when it's a full novel. I will read more, but I'm not going to hurry. Next up, and one I've talked about once or twice already, is the Gunslinger, which is book 1 in the Dark Tower series. Now, I have to be honest, guys, I really didn't enjoy this book. I read this when I was relatively new to Stephen King, and I found it really boring. The Dark Tower series was one that at that point I really wanted to get into, hence me trying book 1. It just didn't happen. Just for me, nothing really happened in the book. When it ended, it kind of felt like it was just starting to kick off and then it was over, so I wasn't too happy with it. But having read a lot more Stephen King recently, I do plan on giving the Dark Tower series another go, so I will be picking up The Drawing of the Three, which is book number 2 of the Dark Tower series, relatively soon, to see if I can get into it. I hope I will. I have a feeling I probably will, now that I'm a bit more in tune with Stephen King's writing, so fingers crossed. Cujo. So Cujo is one of the first classics of Stephen King that I read, and I really enjoyed Cujo. I found the story really enjoyable, really well written. I love the fact that it was based on Spider. I love the fact that it was based on a true story to an extent. So for those of you that don't know, Stephen King was out on his motorbike. He had a bit of trouble. The bike broke down. He managed to get it to a garage. And when he got to the garage, a giant St. Bernard started running towards him. And luckily it healed when the owner of the dog called it back. But that inspired the story of Cujo. I always find it really interesting when you know there's a backstory behind it. It's a difficult one for dog lovers. If you're like me and you are a big dog fan, there are definitely scenes in this which will make you wince a bit, but knowing the story, can't be helped. It's not like it's, anti-dog. It's just a horror story involving a nasty giant rabid dog. It's an absolute brilliant one. Again, it's one I would definitely recommend to Stephen King newbies. As you can see, it's quite a small book. I think it's only 300-ish pages. I really enjoyed it. It's one I will probably reread at some point, so let me know. I've only got a couple more paperbacks, so I'm going to do the last 2 paperbacks and then go on to hardbacks. Next up, this isn't a book, this is a weapon. This is The Stand, which is well over 1,000 pages. I haven't read this yet purely because of the size. I'll hold it closer to the camera so you can see it, versus my hand. It's just absolutely huge. It's a weapon. I do definitely plan on reading The Stand, but what I think I'm going to do is get a hardback edition, so a bigger edition, because the writing on the pages is quite small, and I think it's one that I will occasionally lose attention with just because of how much is going on. If you read The Stand, let me know your thoughts on it, because with it being such a big book, I want to be sure that it's one I'm going to enjoy. I know a lot of people really do enjoy it, but let me know. So finally, for my paperbacks, is actually the only Richard Bachman book that I own, which is The Regulators. This isn't one I've read yet. I found it in Chat Shop for 50p. It's in really good condition. I couldn't not get it. Definitely one I plan on reading soon. I think there's another edition to this, a hardback edition, which has got like a really cool cover. So I'm going to try and pick that up at some point as well. I don't know too much about this one, is the honest answer. This is where it might get a bit boring for you guys. The ones I haven't read, I only know a brief bit amount, because I don't know about you, I try and go into my stories relatively blind. So I will talk about them where I can, but this one I don't really know a lot about. But again, if you read it, let me know. Is it worth my time? Going into hardbacks, so one of my recent favourites for Stephen King is Dolores Clairborne. Now this is quite a, I don't want to say underrated Stephen King book, because it is a popular one, the same as all Stephen King books are, but it's not one that I've heard a lot of booktubers talking about. Maybe it's just an age thing. I found this really pretty edition online, and it's actually an illustrated edition. I will try and pull a page to show you. But interestingly as well, this one was actually bought as a birthday present for someone. I'll bring it closer to the camera so you can see the little message. It's why I like buying used books, because it's nice knowing that this has got a bit of history, as cheesy as that sounds. So in terms of illustrations, you can just see there's these little ones at the bottom of the page. They're every sort of, 20, 50 pages, something along those lines. But this was a super interesting book. So we follow Dolores Clairborne, who is a housekeeper, essentially. And the woman that owns the house that she looks after dies mysteriously. Dolores is arrested, and it's essentially talking through her police interview and going through her life. It's one I included in my Stephen King Reading Month, so I will leave a link above again if you want to know more about this one, because I've already talked about it quite extensively. This is my favourite Stephen King book so far. It's also the biggest book I've ever read, and it's also the last of my collection that I've actually read. So the next few are going to be ones that I don't know a lot about, so, Again, this is one I read during my Stephen King Reading Month, so I will leave a link above if you want to see the video. I won't go into too much detail because this is a book that I've talked about so many times, but for me, this is a masterpiece. This is the book where I really realised just how good Stephen King was and just how much I actually did love and enjoy his writing style. I cannot recommend this book enough. If you're a horror fan, especially if you're a Stephen King fan, if you haven't already, you have to read it. It is just a masterpiece. That is the only way I can describe it. This book is a genuine, for me, I gave it sort of a 9 out of 5.10. If you watch my wrap-up video, you will know why. I just think it's brilliant. I can't recommend it enough. If you haven't already, pick it up. So, moving into the books that I haven't read. This one is actually a paperback, but as you can see, it's kind of an oversized paperback. It's like an extra large one. This is The Green Mile, which is one of the books that I plan on reading next. The Green Mile is a story that everyone knows mainly because of the Tom Hanks film, which was absolutely brilliant. I really, really look forward to reading this one. I just hope I enjoy it as much as I did the film. Again, I'm not going to talk about this one too long, because if you don't know the story of The Green Mile, you've probably been living under a rock. But again, really cool edition. I love the fact that this is kind of like an oversized paperback. It's not something you really see anymore. If you read The Green Mile, let me know your thoughts. So next up, I have one without a dust cover that isn't really that easy to show you. This is Just After Sunset, which is a collection of short stories. Now, if you saw the earlier part of my video, which you will have because you're here now, you'll hear me talk about the fact that I am not actually that big of a fan of short stories, but as I mentioned, I am trying to read more. Similar story for Just After Sunset. It's a collection of short stories that I will be attempting to read at some point. I might just do the odd story here and there rather than reading them flat out. I like the fact that Stephen King does write short stories though. I think especially for people that are major fans of his work, and let's face it, there are a lot of really big Stephen King fans, it's always interesting to give the option of short stories. I will pick it up, but probably no time soon. Next up, this is probably one of my favourites in my collection at the moment. I will hold it closer to the screen so you can see it a bit clearer, but this is actually an omnibus edition, so it's a 3-in-1 edition. This is The Shining, Salem's Lot and Carrie, which are 3 Stephen King books that I cannot wait to read. They're all really big, really popular, major Stephen King books. I know that Salem's Lot especially is a big favourite for a lot of people, the same as The Shining is. So I'm really looking forward to these. I'm not too sure I have a feeling that it's kind of from where it's a bigger book than it would have been when it was standard sort of print released originally. It's a bit more stretched out than the original book, because as you can see, it's not that big considering it's 3 whole books. But I looked it up online, and apparently it has got all the pages. So yeah, complete and unbridged. So it's one I really look forward to reading. I won't do all 3 back to back because I can't read Stephen King like that. It's a bit too heavy. But I do plan on reading them soon. I will probably start with Carrie, as it's the shortest story. Next up, this one's got a really cool cover as well, actually, a really cool look. This is Doomakey. Again, this is one that I haven't heard too many people talking about on BookTube, so I don't know whether it's any good or not, but it looked really cool and I like the idea of it. So Doomakey, we follow the main character who is involved in an accident. He loses his arm and he relocates to Dooma, if my understanding of the story is correct. And when he relocates, he starts to paint as part of his kind of recovery process, and he discovers that his paintings become predictive. He can see the future through his paintings, and then it's how the story unravels from there. Not one I've read yet. It's one I am actually really interested to read this one, especially as I haven't heard too many people talk about it. So I will probably try and read it soon. If you've read it, let me know down in the comments what your thoughts were, because again, it's just not one that I've heard much of, really. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Stephen King has done so many books. It's pretty much impossible for you to hear, you know, concise, proper updates and discussions on each one. But yeah, I'm hoping it's a good one. This video's getting long, so I'm going to try and speed this up as I go. Next up is Sal. So I watched the film for Sal, which was John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson, and I enjoyed it. It's rated absolutely terribly, but it was alright. You know, it's kind of your standard action zombie sort of film. I'm really interested to read Sal. If you don't know the story, it's, as it sounds, based on phones. There is some sort of signal that is sent through phones that makes people become aggressive and quite zombie-like to an extent. Something I found really interesting when looking at this book is that Stephen King, at least at the time of writing this book, didn't own a mobile phone. So I'm assuming there's at least some thought in his brain about how people are kind of zombies when they're on their mobiles, which probably isn't too far-fetched, in all honesty. So again, one I plan on reading soon. It's relatively short compared to some of the other hardbacks I picked up, so hopefully it's a good one. From a Buick 8, again, not one I really know a lot about, but I picked it up because the cover is really cool. So from what I understand it, this one is about a killer car, a Buick 8 that kills people. He likes killer cars, doesn't he, Stephen King? Yeah, that's all I know, so I'm just going to put this one back. Under the Dome. This is one I plan on reading very soon. This will most likely be my next big Stephen King book that I pick up. This is one I find really interesting. As the name gives away, it's about a town that is under the dome. So I watched a little bit of the TV show for this, so I kind of understand briefly. There is a town that is put under a giant glass dome. The town don't know it's happening and they don't know why. And it's about how that town inside copes being restricted from the rest of the world. I'm kind of assuming there's going to be people that try and take over the town from inside, people that try and overthrow the town's government, that sort of thing. But I found it really interesting listening to Stephen King do a interview about this one, talking about how it took him, I think it was like 20-25 years to write. He started the story when he was still a teacher, but felt that it was too big for him, and then came back to it and kind of worked on it as the years passed, which I just think is really interesting. It's really good to know that he didn't want to rush the story and he wanted to do it justice, which is why I want to read it soon. I have to show you this one a bit funny because of the light. Next up is 11/22/63. So this is the story of someone that time travels through a wardrobe to try and stop the assassination of JFK. Is generally what I got. Again, I watched a bit of the James Franco TV series. I watched it kind of up until the point where he first starts going through the wardrobe, and I was like, this shit's mental. I want to read the book first so I actually understand what's going on. Again, I mean, I've said it to everyone. I look forward to reading this. I just think Stephen King's brilliant, basically. I'm not going to go into it too much. Like I said, this is about the assassination of JFK and about how one character goes back in time, and I think it's to try and stop it, essentially. I have no idea where he gets some of his ideas from. Absolutely no idea, but I like it. And finally, You May Relax. Doctor Sleep. This is the sequel to The Shining, so it's not one that I'm going to be reading soon, as I haven't read The Shining yet. I've had this one on my shelf for quite a while. I don't know too much about this one because I haven't read The Shining. I know that this one follows the story of the son from The Shining, but outside of that, I don't know, and I don't want to look into it too much because that would just spoil it for me, so put it back. So guys, massive well done if you've made it to the end. This is looking like it's going to be a relatively long video, so I will try and edit it down as much as possible. I will be doing part 2 to this video when I pick up a bunch more Stephen King books in the future. I know Stephen King is such a popular author that people like to see these videos, so I really hope you've enjoyed this one. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe if you have, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.